Many people know about the effect World War II has had on our country. We try our very best to remember the sacrifices made for our sake by those who fought and died. There is an unknown war, however, and that is the war in the Eastern Front. Many Americans are unaware of the effects that the Russian theater had on the war, and of the battles that surrounded the heroism of the Russian alongside the American. This short film is about a decisive battle fought on the Eastern Front called the Battle of Kursk. I will be talking about its significance and role throughout the course of the war, and why it should mean something to us. The invasion started out strong. Every passing day, German tanks and soldiers would march into Russian lines, obliterating everything and everyone in their path. By the end of 1941, the Germans had made it 25 miles from Moscow, and the end of the Soviet Union seemed near. Winter, however, had different plans for the invading force. A season of mud and sleet prevented the Germans from reaching the heart of Russia, and eventually the defenders drove the opposition all the way back to their starting point. Every year, the German forces were divided in their manpower, and they were eventually reduced to a fraction of their original strength. By 1943, Hitler was desperate for a decisive victory. The Soviets had forced the attackers back hundreds of miles, and something had to be done. The most obvious target to Hitler was a city called Kursk, a city which could decide the outcome of the entire rest of the war on the eastern front of World War II. Kursk is a city in Russia located 285 miles from its capital, Moscow. This location is significant because it tells us that this is one of the battles fought as Operation Barbarossa, or Hitler's plan to invade Russia. At this point, in 1943, the Germans had lost every strategic point in Russia except for Kursk, so this battle was their last chance to make a break in the Soviet lines after failing in other attempts such as the Battle of Stalingrad. The Red Army at this point had been fighting a long and tolling war that drained their country of resources and manpower. Beginning in 1941, they had suffered many defeats as Germany pushed its way into their defenses. By the time of the Battle of Kursk, however, the Germans were disproportionately weak compared to their original state, and the Russians still had millions of soldiers to spare on their enemy. They were coming out with newer technology that were giving the Nazis a run for their money, and they made sure Hitler was kept on his toes concerning his fight with them. Leading up to 1943, the Soviets were giving a decent pushback to what was originally Hitler's plan to conquer all of Russia. The Wehrmacht's humiliating defeat at Stalingrad confirmed it. The Red Army was making a comeback. German high command was becoming more and more concerned by the day. They were losing in the east, and they knew it wouldn't be long until there was an Allied invasion in Europe from the west. Something had to be done. The Reich's efforts to capture Russian oil reserves in the south had failed, and only one group of their collective army was capable of moving at all due to fuel deficiencies and lack of manpower. Hitler called for immediate action in the east, and a plan was set for a battle. The target, Kursk. See, after the Germans were pushed back by the Red Army after their failed attempt to capture Moscow, a bulge had formed in the line encircling the city of Kursk. This salient became a prime target for Nazi strategists, who suggested a pincer-type movement that would close in on the bulge from the north and the south. Hitler wholeheartedly went ahead with the plan, but made a fatal miscalculation in his reasoning. Adolf decided to delay the attacks from their original starting date in March to July due to bad weather. This gave the Soviets enough time to anticipate his move and to set up defenses, and defend they did. Vast minefields were set, and over 2,500 miles of trenches were dug to inhibit the movement of the Third Reich's army. Kursk was packed with thousands of tanks and over 1 million soldiers, all ready to give their lives if it meant the salvation of their country from a regime possibly more oppressive than communism itself. The day came. On July 5, 1943, General Hoth's 4th Panzer Army began the push inward towards Kursk. Led by Mastermind General Heinrich von Manstein, the tanks pushed forward using the infamous German tactic of blitzkrieg. Opposing them was the Soviet 6th Guards Army, led by the prestigious General Georgy Zhukov. A bloody battle ensued, wiping out over 800,000 Russians and over 200,000 Germans, who, despite being outnumbered almost 3 to 1, gave the Red Army a severe run for their money. Kursk also featured what is well known as one of the biggest tank battles in history. at the village of Prokhorovka, where almost 1,000 tanks faced off to the death. The Battle of Kursk ended in a major victory for the Red Army. Hitler eventually terminated the battle against the protest of his officers in favor of diverting men towards the Allies in the West, who had become a major worry for him. This proved fatal, however, as Kursk became the tipping point for the outcome on the Eastern Front. Not a single other offensive operation was made by Germany in the East, and their loss at Kursk triggered them being pushed back all the way to Berlin. Hitler knew how terrible for him a loss at Kursk would be, but at this point, there was no going back. This is essentially when the war on the East ended. So who cares? And especially, why should I care? Isn't this some obscure battle that happened a long time ago? What significance does this have to me? Well, I'll tell you. First of all, the Battle of Kursk is the epitome of warfare. It represents what you don't want to happen, and what happens when that terrible thing does occur. Men suffered and died so that you could live and forget about them. Men that we don't care about because a Cold War has divided us one country from another. Men who we are thankless of, and who rest 6 feet under the earth. This battle was one step closer toward achieving you that freedom that you so enjoy, and we ought to remember that and remember it well. Warfare also represents a leap in technological advancement. You may not know it, but tea bags, stainless steel, zippers, and wristwatches were all invented for the purpose of use in war, and are now used every day by normal people like you and me. While a war truly is hell, it forces civilizations into advancing technically, and in the end, it may profit people more than hurt them. Last but not least, war forces us to think differently about life as a whole. Living in an era of war puts a certain instinct into you, one that is the ability to think more clearly and to gain a level of maturity unattainable by normal means. Of course, there are exceptions, such as those who suffer from PTSD, but in general, going through war makes you so thankful for what you've got, you learn how to be happy, even in situations. If you have talked to someone who has been through World War II, you probably know what I'm talking about. It may sound rather oxymoronic to think that war can cause someone joy, but in the end, it might, should you come out of it alive and in one piece. My final message to you is to keep these slain soldiers always in the back of your minds. When you're thinking there's nothing in this world for you, or that we have little value, just remember that millions gave their lives so they could give you life. Thank you for listening.